What's happening, everyone? Brandon here from Gearist, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Air Zoom Terra Kiger number 8, the Ocho from Nike. The Nike Air Zoom Terra Kiger, which from here on out I will largely refer to as the Terra Kiger 8. This guy right here is the offspring of the first ever trail running shoe that I ever ran in from the swoosh from Nike. And that would be the original Air Zoom Terra Kiger, which we reviewed all the way back in 2013. And by the way, if you're curious, if you read the written review of this or check down below, or let me see if I can put it right here, this is the original review, and man, do I look young. Since that original review, what's interesting is that the other versions of this, like even as recently as the 7 and everything else back there, this shoe has really kind of had some welcome evolutions that have come about with it. If you recall, the Terra Zoom Kiger, the Zoom Terra Kiger number 3, the tongue actually had this whole kind of wrap around from one side thing, and there have been a lot of different evolutions, but the essence of this shoe has remained the same. It's a light and fast trail ripper that just likes to kind of get after it. It's not necessarily going to be your ultra distance shoe or anything like that, but it's also a lot of fun. So let's take a look at this shoe, what it brings to the table in the latest evolution of the Terra Kiger 8, and how that's going to be able to help you on all those trail runs that you're getting out there as we get into nice crisp fall trail running season. So as always, the first thing we're going to do with this running shoe is take a look at the outsole. Now, the outsole material right here, we've got kind of these multi-directional lugs. We've got in both the front and the rear of the shoe. Interestingly, and this is something that I did a lot of digging on, not by writing to Nike. I tried doing that and haven't heard back yet, so I will certainly update this if I do hear back. But what the type of rubber is. So right here on this shoe, it says OG/RS003. Back here, OGRS002. I'll talk about those materials in a moment, but what we find here is a shoe that has good ascending lugs, good descending lugs in the rear foot, and it's really meant to appeal to a broad spectrum of runners on a broad spectrum of terrain. Back to that material for a second, as I feel up here in the forefoot, this 003 versus the 002 in the rear foot, it feels a little more sticky. It's a little softer underfoot. It's going to grip a little bit more back here. It feels a little more high abrasion. This is all high abrasion rubber, but this back here feels a little more rigid, like it's going to offer a little bit more, I guess, protection for sharp things and stuff like that. Now, as we look at the lugs in the front, as you can see there, we basically got 4 columns, if you will, kind of 1, 2, 3, 4. There are flex grooves in between, and they're all angled kind of outward and back so that it's going to really help those ascents, okay? As we look into the rear of the shoe here, we see these lugs, which are multi-directional, actually kind of like this chevron, this up and down. These right here are going to really allow you to descend, and ascend, depending on your style of running. I tend to be a more mid-foot, forefoot runner, so I'm not going to take as much use on these on the way up. But certainly on the way down, they can come into play a lot. Now, these are kind of broken into 2 very distinct sections, and right here in between, we've got Nike React Foam, which is exposed. Now, if you've been watching us on the Grit podcast, you know that Aaron is doing a lot of reviewing for us as well, and Aaron actually commented on this shoe as well. We're going to get to his thoughts on the outsole and all the different sections of the shoe as we go, but first, my thoughts. Again, as I said a second ago, and if you know my running style, you've heard me talk about it before, you know that I'm kind of a mid-foot, forefoot runner. That said, I've also been running exclusively in trails on this shoe. I guess the closest thing to a non-trail would be a dirt road, which is still kind of the same surface. Really, with about 100 miles on this shoe, it's holding up very well. I wouldn't say it's the most durable thing in the world, but I could easily see getting probably 400 miles out of the shoe, depending on material breakdown in other parts. It also seems, as I look at it while I talk to you guys, it also seems that the wear in the forefoot and the wear in the heel is about even, although, you know, there's some kind of cross hatching. I'm not sure you'll be able to see it. That is still evident back here. Meanwhile, you can tell that I really kind of stay on the midfoot because there's not much wear on these lugs back here, but there is right up here. What about traction? Like, what does this material do in terms of keeping my foot attached to the ground? And I'm kind of a mixed bag on this. On typical hard pack Colorado trail, which is much of what I run, especially if it's that dusty kind of dry single track that we have here a lot, this is really a fun shoe. It performs very, very well. It's very nimble, even on kind of hard turning things like that, where you're kind of going around a curve or what have you. The grip on this is quite good. When it gets damp, and this is one of the interesting things here in 2022, where we are right now, it's been a very rainy year for Colorado, believe it or not. When it gets damp, especially on rocks, the grip is not as good. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it made me slow down and have to pay attention to what I was doing, especially when it's on those like flat, smooth rocks, whether the angle is up, down, or actually flat. It doesn't give me a ton of overconfidence. Like I like to just kind of bomb downhill on those things, and I wasn't really able to do that truly in this. Now, to be fair, I'm not breaking any land speed records. Let's let's keep that in mind. So fast is very relative, but I still want to just kind of be able to let fly and not think about it. Additionally, even on some descending things, right? When I'm coming downhill and it's a dry rock, right? There's no rain anywhere. My feet aren't rainy or wet from mud or grass or anything like that. It's just a steeper angle of a dry rock. It does well to a point. If you're coming in and you've got a lot of force apart from your weight, but also the momentum kind of coming downhill at an angle, the grip, again, was not the most wonderful thing in the world. Again, not bad. It wasn't something that was going to make me go, oh God, I can't ever wear the shoe again. Certainly not. I really like the way that this runs, and I'll talk more about that in the ride section, but it did give me pause, make me slow down a second. And maybe, to be honest with you, maybe that's a good thing to make me have to kind of be more cognizant of what I'm doing, more mindful of my running. So in Aaron's case, he actually really liked the outsole of this shoe. It's very almost identical to the Terra Kiger 7. And he said that when he was running, now he's on the East Coast, so he's running on more peaty, kind of foresty, leafy, dirty trails. He actually noticed when there were some wetter runs that there was some mud that tended to stick to this, which made the shoe a little bit more heavy and unwieldy. To be fair, that's probably the case with the large majority of shoes, but it was definitely something that he noticed in this in particular. Now, moving from the outsole to the midsole of the Terra Kiger 7, the first thing, the most prominent piece of the midsole that we find is a full-length Nike React foam midsole. In the forefoot, what we've got is an Air Zoom unit, or a Zoom Air unit, right under the forefoot, under the metatarsal heads. There's no rock plate here, and that's something that I'll touch on here in a minute. Back here in the heel, no Zoom Air unit, but there is an articulated or kind of segmented rock plate back here. For those of you drop nerds like myself out there, the stack heights of this are 26 millimeters in the forefoot and 30 millimeters in the heel for an overall drop of 4 millimeters. The first thing that I will say is that I am a big fan of Nike React foam. I like when foam material can come in and really provide good cushioning, but still be responsive without a bunch of over-engineered nonsense underneath it. With that, there is a bit of engineering because there's that Zoom Air unit right in here. And I have to say that I do like the nice cushion that that provides. Now, I said a second ago that there is no rock plate in this area, and that is certainly the case. And the Zoom Air unit, in addition to the React foam, does provide a little bit of protection. But if you're on a bunch of sharp rocks, right? Now, whether that is kind of large gravel or scree or whatever that is, you're going to notice that there's no rock plate here. It's not something that's overly sensitive or what have you, but it will give you the sense that this is a shoe that lives more on the smooth single track, those groomed trails and things like that. So the final thing that I'll mention about the midsole is that distinct kind of difference of Zoom Air unit in the forefoot with no rock plate, and then articulated or segmented rock plate in the back. You don't really notice that a ton on the smoother terrain. It didn't really stand out to me very much, but you do when it becomes more rocky, particularly on hard descents, whether it's rocky or not, because that's where you're kind of giving more force into the front of the shoe, depending really on which way you're running, right? Are you paying attention to really landing on that whole foot, that midfoot, and under your center of mass, or are you way out in front of you, which I try not to be? So in my case, again, if you're descending, you're on rocky stuff, you're going to notice that transition a little bit more because there's kind of a different feel. To be honest with you, I like the Zoom Air unit in the forefoot. I don't mind it not being around in the rear foot, but I would like to see a rock plate up here, even if it's, again, segmented and very lightweight. Aaron commented that he does like the Nike React foam midsole on this, and actually really likes the additional slight cushioning of that Zoom Air unit in the forefoot. He also distinctly commented that the segmented rock plate in the rear foot really didn't stand out to him. It's just not noticeable. As we move into the upper of the Nike Air Zoom Terra Kiger 8, we find a kind of upper structure that's very similar in structure to that of the 7. That's right. Look at this guy making a cameo appearance here, right? The difference with mesh here is probably one of the biggest things that I noticed that stood out to me a lot. Here you can see kind of this sort of material. It's more fabric-y of an upper, and here we have a very, very open mesh, okay? Now we'll get back to the mesh in a second, but one of the things that is definitely a little bit different, not a ton, but is that welded toe cap. On here, it's a little more lightweight. Neither one is particularly robust. If you kick something, you're definitely going to feel it. As we move into the midfoot of the upper, what we notice is a couple things, and I'll try to get close to the camera. Hopefully it's in focus enough for you guys to see. You see where the mesh upper comes up here. These what become lace loops are tied in. They're attached to the mesh via stitching, and then they actually go internally back down in here. So the lace loops themselves are actually formed from the combination of the external mesh and then this interior banding that goes down around the foot. Internally, the outer mesh of the Terra Kiger 8 is backed by this very smooth, almost kind of like silky material right here. If you can see, that's very, very dirty in there. One of the main functions of that material in particular is to mitigate the openness of that upper, the external mesh, of allowing debris into the shoe. As we arrive at the rear of the upper of this shoe, the thing that stood out to me, and I'll get into kind of my thoughts on it in a minute, is this collar kind of strap that goes all the way around the shoe. This is something that is very different from the Kiger 7. And I really like that addition. Again, I'll talk about that in a moment. And one of the things that it does is it incorporates both of those top eyelets. If you need both, I typically only use the top one. The foam on the interior of the collar, this guy right there, is quite simply just a ring that follows this external band. Now that kind of adds a dual function. One, when you cinch it down, it allows your foot to really stay in place. But in addition to that, it also means that as you tighten this and the collar kind of tightens around your ankle, it's going to provide protection from like overly tightening and really pinching the foot. The heel cup on this shoe is actually quite pliable on the top part, but then it's smaller. It actually kind of sits only down here at the bottom. But frankly, it doesn't really need much of that because this ankle strap that I mentioned a second ago really helps shape that area of the shoe. And finally, you see the pull tab right there. So this was the pull tab on the Kiger 7. It was kind of a good idea. They did it at this angle because that's where you're going to reach down and really grab with your index finger or whatever finger you're using there. In this shoe, they went with something that's more squared off. To be honest with you, I think that that's a good idea in the 7. I don't necessarily need it. It's not really necessary for me. In this case, it's big enough to really grab kind of like that, like we talked about recently in the Hoka Speed Goat 5, because you can actually grab it like this without having to loop your finger through something. But that said, if you do want to put your finger through there, it is a large enough loop to really get your finger easily in there, whether from the top, from the bottom. It's not something that you have to worry about. All right, so here are my thoughts on this upper. I gotta say, it is my favorite part of the shoe, apart from the overall ride and really like enjoying it again, which I'll talk about here in a moment. Upon first looking at it though, I have to say that I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, there's going to be so much crap getting in my shoe, because if you look, like, you can just see fingers straight through it. I mean, it's a very open upper mesh. I was wrong though, very, very wrong. In that silky kind of interior liner, I was also thinking when I got into there, I was like, well, if this keeps the debris out, it's going to make my foot hot. Neither one of those things happened. I will grant you that my feet don't run particularly hot. I'm not somebody who has particularly sweaty feet or anything like that. In this though, because you can notice where there's a lot of overly built material on some shoes, that my foot will kind of noticeably be hot, especially when it's above 100 degrees here in Colorado in the summertime. With this, I felt, number one, nice and cool, or at least temperate, where I would like to be. And secondly, I also didn't really notice much debris getting in at all. Now, when there was debris, there was one notable exception to that actually stood out to me, where I was like, oh my God, this is a piece of debris in my shoe. And it wasn't through here. It wasn't through the sides, to be honest with you. I think it kind of snuck in through the laces. And what happened was this little tiny pebble, like very, very small, like 4 grains of sand kind of combined together into like a tiny, tiny pebble. It got down in here and it managed to somehow get in between that silky liner and the external mesh. So it was right down here, kind of below where the midsole material comes up over that. And so I was kind of stepping on it from the top side-ish thing. That was annoying. What it really required to remove, at first I was like, oh, there's a, like a cactus thing poking through in my shoe or something like that. But I stopped, sat down, kind of did this and jiggled it, came right out. And that's the only time. That happened one time in 100 miles. So really no big deal. As we look at the toe cap protection on this, I'm not somebody who's kicking stuff all the time. Like any trail runner though, I definitely have found more than my fair share of the little tiny saplings sticking up above the ground. In this case, when you're kicking something errantly, the rubber that comes up over the toe of the outsole rubber, that probably does more in the way of protecting your shoe or toe rather from kicking something. This stuff up here is going to primarily keep debris out from on top, or when you're going through grasses and things like that, from that getting in there. Now, I commented on that collar a second ago. This guy right here, this strap that attaches right up into the laces, this thing is burly. Like it's pretty straight up canvas is what it feels like. And I love that, because if you are somebody who needs to really lock down that place because you get a lot of heel lift and things like that, this is going to allow you to do that. I'm not somebody who really does that, if I'm being honest. I don't like I don't like my laces to be overly tight and really socking my foot in there. I like to be comfortably with the shoe just kind of held to my foot, not rammed down on there. That said, when it's using the kind of combination of that external collar here, that collar material, heel strap, collar strap, ankle strap, whatever it is, in addition to that foam on the inside, I didn't notice any heel lift, whether ascending or descending, even when moving around more technical terrain. As I pointed out a second ago, that lacing, those pieces where the external mesh kind of combines with the internal mesh down into these straps that really wrap the whole foot, that goes a long way for me. And the reason that it stands out is because a lot of times, particularly if you're somebody who has narrow feet, you really have to kind of close off that throat. Like these guys are going to be like this for some people. For me, in my very average foot, what I like about this is that a little bit of tightening goes a long way. And the foot really feels wrapped or enveloped in that lacing and the kind of strapping underneath that internal mesh, rather than being held in place by a bunch of laces. Now, for Aaron's thoughts, he really liked this new design of this. The mesh is very, very open. He also mentioned the durability really held up nicely, and I would have to agree with that. There isn't much in the way of support with external strapping and welded things all over the exterior of this, but it's also not necessary because of that internal structure I was mentioning a second ago. He commented, as I did, that this provides a little bit of protection, but it's mostly for debris and sticks coming in through the front as opposed to kicking things. Aaron also commented that the tongue at first feels very thin, and I didn't comment on this, so I'll kind of piggyback on his stuff right now. Over time, there's like some dense padding in there, right? So there's kind of a thicker, more heavy TPU top layer to that tongue, and the foam underneath is actually quite dense. And so it can do a good job of being thin, yet still protecting the top of the foot from feeling any lace rubbing in those areas. Now for Aaron, he actually commented that in the rear of the shoe, because this foam loop that I mentioned, this foam kind of internal foam collar here, because that foam doesn't come all the way to the top, right up to the top and over like many shoes do, that it was some place where he noticed a few rocks kind of getting down there, some just light debris in that place. Now, as we move into the fit of this guy, you can see it right there. The first thing that I'll say is that it does run true to size. Both Aaron and I commented on that. He wears a men's size 13, I wear a men's size 11, and we are both right where we should be. I didn't feel that the shoe was wide or narrow in any particular spot in a bad way, and in fact, I would also comment that the laces, because of the way that they are set up, that wrapping that I mentioned a second ago, it really allows for a lot of customization of what the foot is experiencing on the inside without having to hammer down on those laces. For the rest of the fit, let's move from the front to the back. Now, for me, this is a good toe box from Nike. Nike is one of those shoes where it has made shoes in the past that really come to a point. This is a very good toe box. Again, kind of coming off the Terra Kiger 7. I noticed that for me on descents, on ascents, whatever it is, when I'm moving around corners and turns and things like that, my feet felt like they could splay plenty to really grab the ground, but also didn't feel like it was swimmy or anything like that with a shoe that does try to go more foot shaped sometimes, because that can be, in some cases in the past, I'm not alluding to anything in particular, I'm just noticing that shoes that have gone in the past, in years past, into very foot shaped shoes can often overshoot that mark. And this does a good job of kind of riding that line and being very comfortable. Now, as I mentioned a couple times already, that midfoot, I really liked the way that those laces can hug the foot and really wrap it. That's very, very good fit for me. And it makes you feel confident on those agility needing sections. Now, interestingly, as I mentioned, when you're kind of compromised on some of the grip, particularly when it's steep downhills on flat rock or wet or something like that, you want to know that you've got the confidence in the fit in your shoe, and this accomplishes that very well. For me, the fit in the rear foot is very, very good. The thing that Aaron mentioned a second ago about the foam not coming all the way up to the top didn't bother me. I feel like my foot is very locked down without being pressed locked down. And so whether I'm ascending, descending, what have you, it really stays on my foot nicely. Now, Aaron, like me, has a very average foot, right? It's not a high arch, it's not a low arch, it's not narrow, it's not wide, what have you. He commented on a lot of the same things that I did, including including the way those laces go over top of the foot without being pinching and kind of hugs the foot. There's plenty of room for toe splay, but he did comment, and this is actually something that I should have pointed out earlier, that despite the kind of dual layer mesh, that internal and then the external, which are not really strategically sewn together like you might think they would be, there's no material overlap. And that's a good thing, because what you can find is that sometimes that internal mesh that some shoes can put together can actually kind of bag up on you. And what happens is they fold over, they create a hot spot, and you get a blister. There is none of that in this. The fit is really very good. And now let's talk about the ride of this guy. Now, I said at the beginning of this review that the Terra Kiger has always been one of those shoes that has been light, fast, and fun. I've really enjoyed it in pretty much every single iteration until now, and including now, I guess I should say. There's a lot of ground feel in this shoe, and a lot of that is chalked up to the fact that you've got that relatively thin, kind of 26 millimeters of stack height of that Nike React foam up here, and then that Zoom Air unit, but you can really still tell what's going on with the ground. Now, with that, and again, as I mentioned about the rock plate thing earlier, I probably wouldn't go much more than a half marathon, maybe about 15 miles in this shoe. Now, of course, that's going to depend on the type of terrain, if I'm being honest. If I'm on a dirt road or a groomed trail that's single track with no rocks and things like that, I could see going further in this. But if I'm really bombing something, number one, I'm not running very fast for much more than 10 miles. Then you may want something with a little bit more cushion. That's just my taste. As I've also said a couple times, is the traction of this. Now, for me, again, it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't want to say it's a bad traction shoe, because it's really not. But when you get into those specific situations, which can happen here in Colorado, again, with wet rocks, kind of wet roadish or gravel, things like that, and in particular on those steep downhill flat rocks, which can get dusty, and the dust actually can act like sort of kind of micro ball bearings, the traction is a little bit lacking. I would love to know more about this rubber, but again, I can't find anything about it. So Nike, if you're listening, call me. So in Aaron's case, he again said this is a fast, nimble, fun shoe to run in. And in his case, and again, keep in mind that he just finished training for the Leadville Trail 100, he probably wouldn't do about more than 12 miles in this shoe, give or take. And then it's going to be something that you really want to look for, something a little bit more cushioned. Now, he did say that for a 10K, a trail 10K, this is going to be a great shoe for that. Those things where you want to go fast and be fun. Aaron also commented that this shoe really likes to go fast, and obviously on trail. And that's one of those things that I noticed as well. I forgot to mention earlier, but it's like when you kind of get moving with this, when you get through those sections where you're doing your warm up or whatever it is, the shoe likes to go. And that's always been the case with the Terra Kigers for me. The Terra Kiger 8 is one of those shoes that, again, remains very nimble, fast, fun. It's everything that you want a quick and dirty trail shoe to be. And I frankly, I think it's great looking. I like a bright colored shoe here. We've got that in spades. Now, it came out and it was $140 of retail. And despite not being out for very long, the retail price has actually already begun dropping below $100. We've got some links for that down below in the comments section, so please click on those. It helps us out a lot. The best use for this shoe is going to be that fast, maybe 10K, half marathon. It's going to be basically to go have a lot of fun on some trails, and it's not necessarily your long distance shoe. I mean, maybe some of you out there, and in fact, I'd love to hear your comments if this is a shoe that you want to go longer or you have gone longer in. For me, I would probably look for something a little bit more protective with maybe that rock plate in the forefoot there. But all in all, this is not meant to be that ultra distance shoe. This is meant to be that trail ripper from Nike that it always has been. Guys, before you click away, I want to ask a favor. If you're watching this video at all, please leave us a comment down below. We love to hear from you. What do you guys want to see? What are some brands that you want to hear us feature? Now, we don't just mean running shoes. We're talking about everything. We've got some apparel coming up. We've got fall marathon season coming. That trail running season where it's not excruciatingly hot on those trails. We want to hear what you guys are doing. What plans for races do you guys have coming up in the fall? Are you going for the trails? Are you going for the roads? Are you going for hikes, swims, bikes, whatever it is? Let us know down in the comments below. If you've got any questions about this review, we'd love to hear from you. You can follow us on all the socials. Just search for Gearist, Gearist on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of those things. Talk to us. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you joining, and we'll see you.